When my father died, I thought the worst was over. I stood at the funeral, looking at his picture surrounded by flowers, and my mind was filled with memories of us building a tree house together, of him taking me fishing and always telling me I was the pride of his heart. It felt like my whole life had been tied to him, and now that connection was broken. I felt an emptiness that nothing could fill. But a few days after the funeral, I learned that I had lost more than just my father. I had lost a part of myself. My mother called me over to talk to her. She sat in the kitchen, looking like she was about to confess something she had been carrying around for too long. I didn't understand why she had waited until now. She told me that the father I loved and considered my own was not my biological father. Her voice was shaking, and I could tell she was hurting. She explained that she had had an affair before we were married and I was the result. My father had known the truth all along, but he had decided to raise me as his own. The words were muffled like I was hearing them through water. Everything inside me was turned upside down. It was as if my childhood, my memories, everything I considered the foundation of my life, had suddenly become a fragile illusion. My mother had told me that my father had never treated me any differently than his real children, and that he loved me the same. But that didn't make it any easier. It felt like someone had ripped my heart out and left a huge hole. I thought I could cope if I just held it all inside, but it wasn't just what I'd learned. My brothers had been told the same thing, and everything had changed. We'd been close before. Grown up together, fighting, making up, sharing toys and secrets. I'd never felt any different from them. But after that conversation, they started looking at me differently. There was something alien in their gazes. We sat at the same table eating dinner, but the silence was so heavy it felt like it would crush me. They were talking to each other, not to me. It was like I was a guest in my own home. I tried to talk, but I got short answers. And the more I tried to bring back what was before, the more distant they became. The most painful thing was that I didn't choose this. I didn't ask to be born this way. For me, my father was my real father. For me, there was no difference until my mother revealed the secret. But for my brothers, the difference was huge now. They began to remind me that I had no right to inherit, that I was not part of the blood. I knew they were angry that the truth had come out, but it seemed unfair that the anger fell on me. In the evenings, I locked myself in my room and played my father's words over in my head. He said that family is not just blood, but a choice. He chose me. He was there when I took my first steps, when I graduated, when I didn't know what to do with my life. All of this was real, but now even those memories that should have warmed me hurt. I began to doubt everything. If he really loved me, why did my mother choose to tell me the truth after his death? Why not before? Maybe my father wanted me to never know. The tension grew stronger with each passing day. My brothers stopped inviting me anywhere. If before we would get together, play video games, go on hikes, now everything happened without me. I found out about it by accident when I saw photos on social media. They were laughing, they looked happy. And at that moment I felt like I had lost them too. I tried to justify myself, to explain that it wasn't my fault, that I was the same as before. But words didn't matter. Sometimes I caught myself talking to him in my head, to my father, telling him how much it hurts, how much I miss him, how much I want him to be there and tell me that everything will be okay. But silence was the only answer. I didn't know how to live on. Everything that was the basis of my life fell apart. My family turned into people who look at me like an outsider. My mother tried to be supportive, saying that everything would be fine, but her words rang hollow. I could see that she felt guilty too, but there was too much guilt to fix. I began to notice that I was avoiding home. I spent time outside, stayed longer at work, just to avoid running into my brothers. Their looks, full of cold indifference, cut deeper than any words. Sometimes it seemed to me that they would prefer that I did not exist at all. And at that moment I realized that the story was just beginning. I had lost my father, my family, and my sense of who I was. But I had to decide what to do next. Leave and build everything from scratch, or continue to cling to a past that would never return. After the funeral, life in the house became like a protracted nightmare. I expected that time would heal the wounds a little, but with each passing day it only got worse. My brothers no longer even tried to hide their attitude towards me. If before they simply kept silent or avoided the conversation, now they began to allow themselves poisonous comments. Sometimes they looked like random phrases, thrown out as if by accident, but they hit right to the heart. At dinner, I heard one of them tell the other that now there were only real sons left in the family. They laughed as if it was a joke, but I felt that there was not a drop of humor in these words. I sat at the same table with them and understood that for them I was no longer a brother. One evening, the three of us were left at home. Mom went to her sister, and silence filled the entire space. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to watch TV, but my thoughts were far away. At some point, my older brother came out of the kitchen and stopped in the doorway. His eyes were full of anger, and I immediately realized that he wanted to say something. He started talking about the house, about how my father worked for them, not for me, and that now everything should belong only to them. I tried to object, to say that my father always considered me a son, that he made this choice himself, but they didn't even want to listen to me. My words ran into a wall of hatred and resentment that was growing inside me with every second. I tried to avoid conflicts, but the more I kept silent, the more they pressed. They began to make decisions without me, discussing plans for the future, as if I didn't exist. Sometimes I heard them arguing about who would manage my father's things, and my name was never mentioned in these conversations. Even my room suddenly seemed temporary, as if I was just a guest who would soon be asked to leave. Things got worse when we started going through my father's things. It was a painful process for me. Every item reminded me of him. Every little thing brought back memories. But for my brothers, it was like dividing up the spoils. They argued over who would get his old gun, who would take his record collection, who would take his watch. When I tried to say that I wanted to keep something as a keepsake, they looked at each other as if I had said something absurd. One of them said that I wasn't entitled to anything because I wasn't part of their blood. Those words cut deeper than anything I had heard before. At that moment, I realized that everything that had bound us together was finally broken. My mother tried to intervene. She told them that my father wanted us to stick together, that he never divided us into us and them. But her words were drowned out by their irritation. They felt cheated. And now my life had become a constant reminder of that. I became a symbol of betrayal to them, even if it wasn't my fault. I started spending more and more time away from home. I worked long hours, stayed out late at night, just to get away from their faces. But the more I ran away, the more I felt like I was losing my footing. I'd come home and find myself wishing I could stay outside, just disappear. Sometimes I'd sit in my car in the driveway, staring at the house, and not be able to bring myself to go inside. The hardest part was that I started to doubt myself. If even my brothers thought I was an outsider, maybe I was. Maybe I really didn't have the right to be a part of this family. But with that came another feeling, anger. I'd remember the way my father had hugged me, how proud he was, and I knew no one could erase that. He saw me as a son, even if the blood said otherwise. One night I was sitting in my room, going through a box of things I'd secretly kept for myself. There were old photos of me and my father together, his notebook, a couple of letters. In one of them, he wrote that family is not something we are given at birth, but something we create ourselves. I read those words over and over until I felt tears streaming down my face. It was a reminder that I didn't have to live up to anyone's expectations. But at the same time, I knew that my brothers would never take me back. With each passing day, the tension became unbearable. I began to find myself thinking about packing my things and leaving. I didn't know where exactly, but staying here meant slowly destroying myself. I was afraid to admit it, even to myself, because it would mean giving up everything I had. But perhaps this was the only way to survive. The story that began with a funeral turned into a slow exile, and now I stood on the edge. Either stay and fight for what they would never acknowledge, or leave and start life anew, relying only on the memory of who my father was to me. I decided I couldn't stay in the house any longer, where every glance from my brothers was like a knife. Packing my things felt strange. Every item reminded me of the past, of who we had been together, but now that past felt alien. I packed a few of my things into an old bag, took photographs and letters from my father, anything that could preserve the memory of him, and went out. It was late outside, quiet, and the air seemed colder than usual. I got into the car and just drove, not thinking where. The main thing was to leave and not look back. The road seemed endless. I listened to soft music and let the tears fall until I felt an emptiness that was both scary and freeing. I knew this was the beginning of a new life, but I didn't know what would fill it. The first place I stopped was a small motel on the outskirts of town, cheap and gray, but I didn't care. I opened the bag and looked again at my father's letters. Reread his words about family being more than just blood. These words gave me a strange feeling of strength, that somewhere out there I was still the son of the man who loved me. The next morning I went outside, tried to collect my thoughts, but the feeling of loneliness did not go away. I did not know anyone in this city. I had no friends. No one was waiting for me, and this gave me a strange freedom. I could be anyone. I began to look for a job, something to keep myself busy. Something to distract me from thoughts of home and brothers, from their cold looks and words about someone else's blood. Every morning I went out, looked for ads, called, went to interviews, and with each step I realized that I was becoming stronger. although my body was still shaking from fatigue and nervous tension. In the first days, my thoughts often returned to home, to my native walls, to what no longer belonged to me. I remembered how my father taught me to cope with difficulties, how he said that any blow in life can be survived if you remember who you are. These memories became my only guide. Over time, I began to look for new places, to walk the streets, to go to cafes, to meet people, although the effort seemed futile. I lived in a motel, saved every dollar, cooked my own food, began to feel a taste of independence that had never existed before. Sometimes I would see children playing, hear their laughter, and in such moments the sense of loss would become acute. I would think about my brothers, about the fact that we would no longer be able to share these moments. But along with it there was a determination. I would no longer allow strangers to dictate who I should be, no longer be part of a family that rejected me. After a few weeks, I found a small job in a bookstore, and this gave me a sense of routine, something that kept me afloat. Every day I encountered people, their stories, and sometimes I realized that we are all looking for a place where we will be accepted, and that the rejection of the family is not the end, but just a turn to something new. I started writing in a journal, writing down my thoughts and feelings, rereading my father's letters, and it helped me stay connected to the one who believed in me. Sometimes I would call my mother gently, without accusations, just to hear her voice, and it gave me a little piece of home that was no longer there. A few months passed, and I began to notice changes in myself. My self-esteem was growing. The fear of my brothers was gradually subsiding. I realized that they no longer had power over me, that their opinions did not define who I was. And although the pain of losing my father and alienating my brothers would never completely disappear, I began to build a new life based on my own rules, on the memory of the man who saw me as a son, on the understanding that a real family is not just blood, but those who are nearby, who love and support, even if there are only a few of them. For the first time in many months, I felt that I could breathe deeply, that I could be myself, that I would live on and create my own story, even if the path was difficult, lonely, and unpredictable. I knew that there would be many trials ahead, that there would be pain, that sometimes the past would pull me back. But now I had an understanding that true strength is the choice to be yourself, no matter who considers you a stranger, and that the father I lost would always be with me in these choices, in every day I live, in every step towards freedom and independence. And it was this thought that gave me the strength to move on, to rebuild my life, to create new connections, new memories, new moments of happiness that no one could ever take away. After several months of living far from home, I did not expect them to find me, but the call from my older brother caught me by surprise. He did not immediately say why he was calling. He spoke with strange pauses, as if choosing his words, but there was a tense mixture of anger and uncertainty in his voice. He said that my father had wanted us to stay together, that the house and the inheritance should be distributed properly. But now they realized that without me it was not so, and that I should come back, although they did not know if I could ever be part of the family again. Everything inside me sank, the desire to see them mixed with caution and bitterness. I remembered every cold look, every word about foreign blood, and I understood that it would be almost impossible to regain their trust. Still, I agreed to meet, to hear them directly, without intermediaries and letters. On the appointed day, I arrived, my heart pounding, and the street I walked down seemed strange and familiar at the same time. They met me in silence. Only the eldest brother took a step forward. The conversation began tensely. We discussed the house, things, the inheritance, but gradually the conversation slid to real feelings. They admitted that their anger at me was a mixture of pain, resentment, and misunderstanding, that they felt betrayed, and this prevented them from seeing me as I had always been, a son, albeit not by blood. I listened and tried to understand, but inside me a mixture of resentment and longing was still seething. We talked for a long time, and the first minutes were almost wordless. Then childhood memories, shared moments, laughter and fights emerged, and gradually the tension subsided a little. I explained that I could not forget their coldness and words, that I needed time to believe that they saw me as a son not only in their memories of the past but now. They listened, sometimes nodded, sometimes remained silent, and in this silence there was a feeling that the bridge was still fragile, but it existed. We agreed to start small, have dinner together sometimes, talk, meet on holidays, but without pressure. I realized that this was the beginning of a new stage, not a return to the old, but the construction of a new mutual understanding, with caution and respect, without illusions. For the first time in many months, I felt that the door to the family was not completely closed, that there was a chance for a slow dialogue, for the restoration of relations, at least partially. And this feeling gave a strange relief. I can be myself with my memories, with the memory of my father, and at the same time see again those who were near before, even if the path to real closeness will be long and difficult. But now it is possible. A year has passed since that call, and I realized one harsh thing. The bridge that my brothers and I began to build is too fragile to withstand life. We met sometimes, tried to talk, sometimes even laughed at old memories, but it was like looking at someone else's photographs, as if I were only observing their life from the outside. Every time I appeared in the house, I felt this invisible line dividing us, and I understood that no words could erase it. They tried, but their eyes still said, "You're not like us." Sometimes they'd invite me to dinner, but more often they'd just say nothing, even when I tried to make conversation. I began to notice that I was spending more and more time alone, even when they were around, and that feeling of being a stranger became a part of me. I tried to build my own life separately, but the emptiness left by my father's death and my brother's abandonment wouldn't go away. The job, the friends, the rented apartment, all of it was just a facade, a mask that hid the pain. Sometimes I'd just sit in the kitchen, looking at photos of my father and old letters, and I knew that none of it would bring back what was lost. My mother tried to be supportive, but her own guilt and pain made any conversation difficult. I stopped calling her so often because every "how are you," she said, was filled with regret, and regret only made me more tired. I now came to birthdays, holidays, and family gatherings as a guest, but even a guest doesn't feel as alien as I do. I saw them laughing, hugging, discussing their affairs, and I understood that I belonged only to memories, but not to a real family. Sometimes I tried to explain to myself that everything would be better, that with time they would be able to accept me. But the more I waited, the clearer it became that waiting was a waste of energy. I tried to make new friends, create new connections, but nothing could replace the feeling of kinship that was destroyed. Sometimes at night I woke up from nightmares where my father was alive and laughing, and my brothers were again nearby. And each time I woke up in an empty apartment, understanding that this would never be true. The most terrible thing was the realization that the strangeness had become a part of me. It sat deep inside, in every look, in every word, in every silence. I began to avoid conversations, trying not to show how much what used to be home hurt me. Time passed, and the wound never healed. I realized that life goes on, but I am now a person who lives on the edge of someone else's world and my own loneliness. Sometimes I think about what it would be like if my father were here, if the truth had come out earlier, if my brothers had never found out who I am not on paper. But these are thoughts that change nothing. My life has turned into a series of days where I exist, but do not live fully, where the laughter of strangers reminds you that you will never be a part of what you have lost. I have realized one terrible truth. Sometimes love, memory, and years of shared memories are not able to overcome someone else's hostility, and some wounds remain forever. Even a year after leaving, I still feel like the same stranger boy who went into the unknown, and now no one and nothing can return that sense of belonging that once seemed self-evident. I live, but my family is only memories and an emptiness that is always with me, and it seems that there will never be a better ending to this story for me.